Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Lewis Hamilton branded the Spanish Grand Prix the worst of his entire career, and yes, that may be somewhat hyperbolic, but there's no doubt that a recent run of Ferrari form, especially on Hamilton's side of the garage, has been far from where he would like to be. Hamilton responds to the situation, spotted again at the Maranello factory for Ferrari, putting in some serious work, but with a good run of races historically for Hamilton over the next few rounds, this needs to be a serious turnaround, especially with the upgrades that Ferrari bring, or Hamilton makes it very clear he will be demanding his team switch full focus to 2026. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Starting here, this is Lance Stroll. Is he going to drive the Montreal Grand Prix? That is the big question. He injured his wrist. We don't really know how. We think it was a consequence of what happened at the start of the 2023 season. But of course, there were all these rumours that he was, smashing stuff up in the garage, swearing at team members. Now, his team kind of came out and said, there were some sources anyway from Aston Martin that said, no, that wasn't really how it went down. But still, there's talk about whether Stroll's going to race, because my perspective would be, if it's true that his wrist has been injured for 6 weeks or so and has been getting progressively worse, they did a corrective surgery the most recent weekends. Are they going to put him in the car 2 weekends later? Does that not seem a little bit risky? You would argue probably yes. But according to reports today, it is likely that Stroll will indeed get back in the car. Now, Drugovich was seen on his way to Le Mans for a lot of the testing stuff they have to do. Now, that's expected, even if Drugovich is going to drive in Canada. He's not going to be flying out there yet. He's got work to do for Le Mans just in case. But according to the race, the latest rumour is that he is on his road to recovery from a wrist operation, and it's, unlikely that a final decision will be made yet, but all on course apparently to return to Canada anyway, because, of course he's going to want to drive in his home Grand Prix, but, man, it seems a bit of a risk, no, to throw him straight back into the car in these circumstances, and also makes it even more painful that I didn't even get a race a second car back in Barcelona when, in another world, Stroll never qualifies, they put somebody else in and he gets to drive it instead, such as a guy like Drugovich. I know there's been some, theories, let's say, that this whole thing is intentional, just to make it clear that, nobody else could be better than Stroll, because, if Stroll, let's say, departs a race, Drugovich or Bottas or somebody else comes in, does a good job, it makes Stroll's position more questionable, right? Because, yes, he's scored actually loads of points this season, certainly compared to his teammate Fernando Alonso, who only recently scored in Spain this entire year. He has been out-qualified by Alonso like 20 times in a row still, right? So, that's not really changing. But also, we don't really know how good Alonso still is. Obviously, we're going to have the Hamilton discussion in a second. That's certainly a relevant one. And look, Alonso 43, whatever he is now, it's, difficult to imagine that he's still in his prime. So I think that's the question on Stroll, is that, well, maybe the Aston Martin's pretty good. Alonso is still Alonso, but he's maybe not quite prime Alonso. And therefore, it would be a real interesting situation if we saw somebody else get to drive the Aston Martin. Stroll, and presumably Daddy Stroll, does not want that to happen, so maybe this is why we're seeing what we're seeing, but intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Now, yesterday we talked about the rumour that Russell is going to re-sign with Mercedes, or let's say Mercedes are going to re-sign with Russell, because Russell certainly will sign the dotted line if it is presented to him. But there were some rumours yesterday that Aston Martin are expressing interest in Russell. Now, this, I don't know, shouldn't be a massive surprise. If you're Aston, you're certainly looking to consider what your lineup looks like over the next couple of years. It's, the current lineup is unsustainable for the next couple of seasons. Of course, Max Verstappen is, as we pretty much know, their primary target. But it kind of makes sense, I suppose, to consider George Russell as well. At the end of the day, he's out of contract, Russell, and, if Mercedes don't re-sign him, where makes the most sense? I think the general theory has been, so the last few days, the Mercedes Red Bull driver situation has developed where we believe that Toto is probably going to re-sign George. That was the rumour that we discussed yesterday, but I wouldn't say that that's guaranteed until the paper is signed. Max Verstappen could always pick up the phone to Toto and say, look, I'll do whatever you want, I just want to get out of this damn team and I'll come to Mercedes, which, who knows? I don't think that's going to happen. We'll see. But let's say it does happen. Max goes to Mercedes, Toto gets his man after all the flirting of the last 12 months or so. Frankly, more than that at this point. It started when Horner was potentially going to get fired. Where do you go if you're George? The general discussion we've had is that, well, George would just swap. George would be frustrated to lose his seat to Max, but he would go to Red Bull. That was the general theory. But, if you're any driver, you're looking at the Red Bull situation, you're saying, damn, that car has been built for Max's preferences for a few years and it's gone so extreme that it doesn't seem to be drivable by really anyone else. I'm not, Russell isn't going to go out there and say, I've got no confidence in myself. Obviously, Russell's one of the most confident drivers on the grid, and in large part for rather good reason. But if you are George and you had the choice to go to Red Bull, given their engine could be somewhat questionable and their car design dynamics have been difficult to tame for anyone other than Max, or you have the option to go to Aston Martin, who have Newey and Honda and the best factory in Formula One. Yes, they have their issues that Newey has described, such as their simulation tools, which still aren't where they want to be. But which would you choose? Like, if you're Russell, you get kicked out of Merc, do you go to Red Bull? Do you go to Aston Martin? Something to think about. It might not be relevant, because they'd probably get the Mercedes deal, but intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. This is an interesting statement from F1, F2, F3, and the FIA. Now, I find statements like these kind of interesting because they don't really do anything, like, respectfully. That's just my opinion. But, they're obviously nice to read, I guess, and they're also make it clear from the team's perspective and from the sports perspective that they do condemn online abuse, because if they don't say things like this, then they kind of get caught in the crossfire of, oh, well, are they being complicit in some regard? So I kind of think that's why these statements happen. Do they really affect the way that anyone acts online? I'm not so sure. Even with the FIA putting their signatures technically to this, is Ben Sulayem still going to get plenty of abuse? Yeah, it is what it is. This is sports at the end of the day. But this is what the championships say. On behalf of our teams and drivers, F1, F2, F3 and the FIA, through their United Against Online Abuse campaign, firmly condemn abuse and harassment in any form, will continue to collectively act upon and report abuse to social media platforms. Whether you're a fan or part of the motorsport world, we're all driven by passion. At the heart of it all, there are humans. We urge everyone to remain respectful towards the athletes and their teams. So I guess a reasonable statement. The whole "there are humans" line sounds a little bit alien, but, whatever. I guess it's a reasonable enough statement what they're trying to say. Why is it happening? Like, why they put this statement out? That is a matter for debate. We obviously know recently that, Colapinto's fans have been getting into a bit of drama with regard to Dewan and Sonoda and a couple of others. I think the big talking point over the last couple of weekends was actually Alex Dunn. So if you guys watch the Formula 2 feature race, you'll know that this guy, Alex Dunn's car, and he's quick, but man, yeah. So into turn one, let's just say he tried to pull off some heroics into Zandvoort and it didn't go to plan. He hit the side of Martin. This is when Martin made the comment about this guy thinks he's Max Verstappen or whatever, and this is what happened at turn one. It was a huge pile up basically, and Dunn was getting a lot of online abuse for this. And, obviously some of it I'm sure went too far, as people always do, but equally, if something like this happens, people are going to talk about it, aren't they? Some of them are going to say nice things, some of them are going to say not so nice things, and that's how the world works. But anyway, Dunn was talked about here, McLaren discussed it, maybe that's one of the reasons why this was all going on, and it was the same story for Lawson maybe, and Red Bull at the start of the year as well. Look, at the end of the day, you're paid millions of dollars to drive a car fast. If you don't drive a car fast, lots of people are going to criticise you, and some small percentage of those people are going to go too far with the comments. But, it is what it is. Not really sure that's ever going to change, but there is some positives for Racing Bulls to take away. They have scored over the triple header that we just had 20 points, more than Mercedes at 18 and more than Williams at 17, which is pretty remarkable to think about, that they outscored Mercedes over that period, who had a really difficult triple header. But for the Red Bull situation, what does it mean for their drivers? Because Lawson had his chance in the Red Bull, didn't go to plan. Hadjar hasn't yet, but maybe will. And that's the big question on what's going to happen if we do get this Max Verstappen race ban. Now, whether it's going to happen is a different question. People are asking questions as to, well, Max is kind of like the big star right now. He certainly keeps things entertaining. They won't want to ban him. But if the rule says this, then they're going to have to ban him. It is what it is. Even, small violations in practice and qualifying and stuff can get you a penalty point here or there, and anything over the next 2 rounds will mean a race ban for Max. So, there has been some suggestions that maybe the FIA might go easy on him, but I don't really think that, well, first of all, they shouldn't. It should all be the same, and I don't really think they will. Magnussen, of course, got his ban as well last time out, last season. Hadjar is in a tricky spot because we know that the second seat at Red Bull is potentially a poison chalice. Well, I would just go as far to call it a poison chalice, destroyed everyone else's career up to this point. Is Hadjar going to want to jump straight in? Look, he's going to be a confident young gentleman, sure. Do Red Bull want to put him straight in? That might also be unwise, but if the opportunity arose that Max got a race ban and somebody else had to step in, I would first of all be fascinated to see how that driver would get on, right? Like with no Max around, with 2 non-Max drivers in a Red Bull, would they be able to set it up in a certain way to help them? I don't know. It would be fascinating, let's say. But apparently, according to rumours from Planet F1, the likelihood of either of these 2 gentlemen getting the drive is borderline equal. So we saw yesterday that ideally they would have Arvid Lindblad getting a super license exemption so he could drive the Racing Bull in replacement for one of these guys. But according to the reports, the chances of either of these guys getting the drive from Planet F1 is practically 50-50. Difficult to believe that, really, just because Hadjar's outperformed Lawson lately. They've seen what Lawson can do in the tricky Red Bull. The general theory is that the Racing Bulls is not an especially fast car, but it is possibly the most tame car on the grid. So, Hadjar's done an excellent job in that machine, and, he's been better than Lawson most of the weekends. But we've not yet seen Hadjar in a very tricky Red Bull. We saw Lawson for only a couple of rounds, but we saw Lawson. So, look, if I'm Red Bull and the situation arises where I need a replacement because Max gets banned for a race, I'm putting Hadjar in, I'm putting him in for 1 round. It might not go to plan, it might be awful, but you've got to do it, right? I guess the logic is, well, Lawson at least had a couple of races there, so he might be better. But also, if you're Red Bull, you want to learn more, you're probably going to put Hadjar in just to see if he can, somehow find a way to adapt. That could also put Yuki under some pressure as well. So, yeah, that would be very fascinating. Intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Speaking of Aston Martin, as we did a little bit ago, Fernando says that however good next year's car is, of course, is critical, depending on whether he will stay around in Formula 1. And there was a couple of things on how good their car is going to be. This is back in April, where Andy Cowell said that Newey was effectively locked in his room just preparing a fast car. And there was also this that Amanda Newey, Adrian Newey's wife, put on Instagram the other day when she said, well, the husband is in a design trance, Benji the dog is in an affection trance. But the point being that effectively Newey is just locked in right now, putting pen to paper or pencil to paper on building this machine. But the most disappointing team of the year, probably, I would say, maybe certainly, have actually been Ferrari, because they're still second in the championship, right? But it's a very different second to what it was last year. Last year they were second, overtook Red Bull and nearly won it, if not for the final Grand Prix. This year they're second, congrats, but they're a million miles away from where McLaren currently are dominating the championship. Pretty remarkable how last year Alpine had 5 points, they were not last. This year they have 11 points and they are last, which is pretty embarrassing for a factory team. Sauber at 16 points after Hulkenberg's phenomenal P5 at the Spanish Grand Prix. Aston actually in 9th now, behind Sauber even. Haas, Racing Bulls, who actually have the same, interestingly enough. Williams have made big strides, and then it's the top 4, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren. But apart from Ferrari, in a rather different order to where they were last year. So, great job, Fred Vasseur and the team, but obviously it's not where they wanted to be. And Lewis Hamilton's recent form has been the major talking point about Ferrari in recent times. He's obviously struggled with the way that the car has gone in terms of balance. There was a video that the race put together on this describing how so they tried to run their car a certain way at the start of the season. That resulted in them running the car low and having too much plank wear. That was effectively making the car get disqualified. So they've tried to find a solution for that issue, but the solution seems to be to run the car in a very extreme setup window that makes it particularly volatile to any sort of issue, and certainly doesn't seem to be set up in the way that Hamilton likes. At the start of the season, when they ran their car lower, Hamilton seemed to be happier with it, but over the last few rounds they've changed things around. It seems to have moved more towards Leclerc's preferences than Hamilton's, and it's still not really fast anyway. I mean, even on a good qualifying session, they're still half a second off pole. In the race, Leclerc got another great podium in Spain, but of course, there was some good fortune in play there with the late safety car because of Antonelli's engine failure. Hamilton, had a pretty torrid day. To be fair, in the middle stint, he actually found some pace, and then at the end of the race, it all kind of went away from him, and Sauer had fresh tyres, and Hulkenberg passed him fair and square on track with the fresher rubber to get the, P5 in the end of the Grand Prix after Max's penalty dropped him further down the grid. So Hamilton was obviously frustrated about it. He's been frustrated, actually, significantly with the changes to the front wings. Hamilton talked about how it was a complete waste of money. I know there's been some debate on this because I think in many respects Hamilton might well be correct, but there's also been talk about, okay, maybe Hamilton's saying this because it affects him more, right? Because the flexible front wings allow a better compromise to be struck between the high-speed oversteer that these cars tend to suffer with and the lower-speed understeer. The removal of some of the flexibility makes that compromise more difficult to achieve, which potentially is hurting Hamilton's performance right now to some extent as well. So, yeah, Hamilton talked about this a few days ago. The question really is, where do they go from here? This is Hamilton spotted at Maranello yesterday, putting in work, of course, with the team, as I'm sure Charles Leclerc is doing as well. But there was plenty of talk about Hamilton around about the Miami weekend, putting in some extra time, certainly before Miami, putting in some work at the factory, trying to figure out, okay, if we're going to set the car up in this way, what can we do about it? I think the positive for Hamilton is there are upgrades coming, and upgrades that will, at least for his perspective and his adaptation period, because, I think ideally Ferrari wanted to make a car that was quite drivable this year. They don't have that. They have a car that is, currently being set up in a way that Leclerc seems to prefer. And obviously Leclerc's been there several years, so he kind of understands the extremes of the limitation of the cars that he's been driving. That's putting Hamilton in a more difficult predicament when it comes to the adaptation that he started very well with, certainly in China with the sprints. Even Miami got a podium in the sprint as well, but it's been very much hit or miss. Imola was a good performance, of course, the safety car helped, but he's not really been able to string it together. The upgrades, though, they're bringing to the rear suspension and elsewhere should, for Hamilton's sake, bring things back into the right window. If they don't, then Hamilton will very much be of the opinion that, okay, either it's me who's the problem, or we need to just fully focus on next year, because that's what Hamilton talked about yesterday. I don't know what upgrades we have coming. I mean, I know apparently what upgrades. I'm sure Hamilton does. But the rumour is anyway, rear suspension over the next couple of rounds, a few changes of the floor and stuff like this. We haven't had an upgrade for some time. We'll keep pushing with what we have, but before too long, I'll be saying focus on next year. So building foundations this year, learning about the tools in terms of structure, in terms of our processes, nailing those. So when we arrive next year, we'll be with the car that we really want. So Hamilton's not been here long. He's already very much bought into the next year Ferrari, which is, of course, how Ferrari tend to operate. And, I think there's enough evidence now to say that, okay, bring these upgrades over the next couple of rounds, then the focus needs to fully shift to next year and beyond. I will say this comment from Juan Pablo Montoya. I mean, look, he comes out with some banger comments, and sometimes I think they're completely delusional. But at the end of the day, it's Juan Pablo Montoya, so you got to listen to him. And he says this. I don't know what you guys think about it, because I think I don't really believe it. But he did say the following: if they want to be competitive next year, the car has to be more based on Lewis, because the cars that have been based on Charles can win 1 or 2 races a year, but no titles. So I thought it was a very interesting statement, actually, from Montoya, because his conclusion is, I suppose, that Charles Leclerc has been driving the development of these cars over the last few years, and they've found a car that can typically win on occasion, Monza, Monaco, right? Couple of races like that. The rest of the year, though, they do tend to struggle, and I guess it's been a reasonably consistent trend. Now, is that a Leclerc issue? Is that a Ferrari issue? I don't know. It's a bit of a question. I guess if you look at it historically, you might argue that, yeah, when Hamilton was leading the charge at Mercedes, they were designing cars that were capable of winning, but also with both drivers as well, and were capable of winning consistently and very consistently at that. Now, is that a Hamilton phenomenon, or is that the fact that, Mercedes as a team, I think there's probably a bit of truth in this. There probably is a bit of truth in this. But there's also the idea that maybe Ferrari, especially in these more tricky ground effect era, just simply aren't up to the task as much as Mercedes used to be. That's probably the primary piece of the puzzle. But maybe there is an argument to say that next year, with Loic Serra, of course, now properly kind of in charge over there at Ferrari from a technical direction perspective, former, Mercedes colleague with Hamilton before, maybe this could be the way that they start to move. They take a little bit more feedback from Hamilton, because at the end of the day, if you're paying Hamilton all this money, you probably want to use his experience and his knowledge and his expertise. And, is that a criticism of Leclerc? Not really. I think Leclerc's a phenomenal driver. But this is what Montoya says, so I thought we'd talk about it anyway. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. I guess the only good thing that Hamilton can take away from this season so far is the fact that the pit stops have been great. But as I said right at the start of the video, and this is certainly relevant now, these next few Grand Prix have historically been good ones for Hamilton. Spain historically has been a great track for him. Wasn't so good last weekend at all, but Montreal is the scene of many great victories for Hamilton. He has 7 wins around that circuit. After that, it's Austria, right? He's gone well there. Then it's Silverstone after that. So, and then Hungary's not too far away. Right, this European stint, if this isn't strong for Hamilton, then maybe it never will be at Ferrari. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.